We should go. We should go.
Hi, I'm Anika, and I'm really happy to be here today. First off, I want to thank all my friends who've come from really far away places here today. So I just want to say I see you, figuratively, because you're in the dark right now, but I see you, and I really appreciate you, so thank you. I think this year, I've been thinking a lot about climate change, but also more broadly, the way that humans form and maintain our relationships with the environment and land. So a few months ago, I was in Taiwan. So this past year, I lived with the Amis indigenous tribe in southeastern Taiwan as a Fulbright scholar. And living with them really reconceptualized a lot of things for me. Specifically humans and our relationship to the environment and land. When I lived in that community, I mean, our time and our lives was governed by the seasons. It was governed by what nature sort of provided with us. And our food is what we collected by diving and foraging in the forests. And I don't know, like if we needed to create anything, instead of thinking, where can I go buy that, we would go to the forest and find a sustainable source, cut it down, and then use it to make something with our own hands. And I think after coming back to America, I've realized how separated we are from our environments, especially in cities. Everything is just an artificial construct, right? You don't even see dirt. It's paved over, and we're just in these boxes all the time. But I think in this way, the environment becomes invisible to us. And then in this way, it's alienated in our minds. And I think that's how the relationship we have with it decays over time. And so this is one thing I've been thinking about. But another thing that really struck me was how my notion of climate change morphed over time. So before, I remember thinking, but when I moved to Taiwan and lived in that community, and it's near the equator, I was hospitalized 5 times in the month of July just because of the impact of the heat on my body. And it was really crazy because I'm generally a really healthy person, but all of a sudden it just felt like there was this huge, huge weight on my body. Like it entered through my mind and then it just kind of spread all throughout my body to my toes and my fingertips. And it was like this weight on me. And then I noticed that I lost my appetite and I stopped eating. Because even if I tried to eat, I would just feel nauseous. And it's kind of like I had this mental fog that was always there. And I didn't know why or what to do about it, but it just kind of felt like I was suffocating. So I was hospitalized a few times, and it got to the point where sometimes it felt like the hospital was the only safe place we could be, because in a poor community, you don't have air conditioning, you just open the windows and, I don't know, go take a dip in the ocean. But what that meant was a lot of times the only sanctuary I had was in that hospital when I woke up and there was cool air. But then knowing that I would have to leave and probably be back there again soon. So I think that is what really, really changed my conceptualization of what climate change is. Like, I think because it had such a visceral impact on my body, it seemed more like climate violence, you know, where it's like, it's violent because it's attacking you and you can't do anything about it, and the more vulnerable the situation you're in, the more vulnerable you are to its negative impacts. And that's sort of when it really clicked for me. Like, what is this airy thing, climate change, that a lot of times, like, it started off being almost like a white environmentalist thing, and not knowing how, if you're not white, how does environmentalism fit in with your culture? And so I think there's a lot of layers to it, definitely, but that's just what really shifted my perspective about climate change. So when I returned to the US, I think after that experience, I just felt a need to learn more, that I feel like, okay, now I know how bad it is, and now I need to figure out what's being done about it, because that's kind of scary if there isn't things being done about it. And I know the Western narrative is that we're not getting things done about it. So I spent a few months really deeply researching climate change adaptation, and one thing that I kept stumbling across was the name of the country that both of my parents immigrated from, Bangladesh. A lot of reports by the World Bank, the World Health Organization, the UN, they all said that Bangladesh is either the most or one of the most vulnerable countries to the impacts of climate change. And so at first when I read that, I think I just kind of sunk inside because I thought about how I still have family members who live there, especially in the coastal parts, and just, I mean, if I had existed just one generation back, like, maybe I'd still be living there, you know? And so it got to this point where, I don't know, I just didn't really know what to do, and I just kind of dove even deeper into research. But then I found something really, really cool. And what it is that Bangladesh's government actually put out this huge report called Bangladesh 2100. And it's basically their like long-term futuristic view of how Bangladesh is gonna like change their entire society, like their agriculture, their economy, like all of their sectors, their labor force. They're trying to just like completely shift it around climate change. Like they're viewing climate change as an opportunity, not a devastation. And so when I found this plan, I just thought it was beautiful and elegant that, you know, this country decided to bank on hope so much that they had this clear vision for what they wanted to be at 2100. And so I just felt really moved by that, because I think there is a very antithetical sort of viewpoint in the West about the kind of flailing countries that are experiencing climate change, and almost sort of in like a poverty porn sort of way. And so at that point, I started to talk to some of my friends about this, and two of my really good friends, Hannah and Ufoma, they're also first-generation Americans. We basically all kind of ideated on this topic together, and we decided to come up with a project. And the project idea is we're trying to use remote sensing satellites, so just satellites that exist around the planet. We're trying to extract the aerospace data from them and then apply machine learning, and in order to evaluate these water management strategies that Bangladesh has been using for about 100 years. And so this strategy is really, really interesting because so Bangladesh, the entire southern part is just coast against the Bay of Bengal. And basically this land is always dancing between land and sea. Like it's just filled with rivers, almost like veins in your body, and it's just always in flux between land and sea. So this place is also one of the most fertile places in the world because it's so volatile, and so a ton of people live there and are expected to become environmental refugees in the next decades because of climate change, and since that place is already so volatile. But the really cool thing that I found is the people there actually figured out a strategy of letting the water, like letting the ocean reclaim some parts of land, some parts of that ecosystem, and they found that if they waited 5 years and it was flooded with water for 5 years, the land actually grew by about 5 to 8 feet in height, and it was more fertile than it was before. And I think that's bizarre because I think with climate change we get all these narratives of like doom and gloom and drowning, but this is really one of the only times I've heard of there being rebirth and growth. Growth to the point where it'd be taller than rising sea levels, and you would be fine for maybe a few centuries. And it's just, I think, really fascinating and beautiful to me that this sort of idea, this other philosophy of how humans should have a relationship with land and how we should or shouldn't control it. I think that's a lot of what really inspired what I'd like to show you today. So yeah, we're working on that research project with the government of Bangladesh, which is pretty exciting. But today what I wanted to share is I created a sort of immersive art and sound piece about tracking some of my sort of internal struggles and feelings about climate change in Bangladesh, but kind of how that births climate resilience eventually. So yeah, I hope you enjoy.
Bangladesh is going to drown by Channel 15.
This country adorn their lips with the name of my home is when they talk about climate change. Bangladesh is going to drown by 2050. 7 words strung together in a sickeningly perfect way, just to illustrate a point. That at the half-century mark, all the scientists will be right.
Bangladesh is going to drown by
People will absent-mindedly nod their heads, say it was a tragedy, and pretend we didn't carry this blanket statement into existence through charmingly articulated erasure and violence.
Bangladesh is going to drown by Channel 15.
Bangladesh is a place far enough away, yet close enough nearby to be tokenized as a placeholder for American guilt. I hate that people only view Bangladesh as a site of drowning and tragedy, a place that we already expect and see spaces.
Bangladesh is going to drown by Channel 15.
Thinking about this blanket statement leads me to 2 places: anger and existential despair.
Bangladesh is going to drown by Channel 15.
First, I felt anger, because it's the actions, lifestyles, and systems of those living in the world's richest countries. It's capitalism, environmental exploitation, and imperialism, which has produced this global catastrophe that is viscerally impacting the poorest of the poor on this planet.
Bangladesh is going to drown by Channel 15.
Then I felt despair, because of the complexity permeating climate change in vulnerable places. It's not just about rising sea levels, but the chain of events that it triggers. Coastal land is flooded, causing mass migration to urban cities already at capacity. Most migrants wind up working in factories with inhumane working conditions. Women and children make up 80% of the people who are left behind. Seawater intruding into farmland causes the soil to lose its fertility, and the nation's food supply, rice, in an already starving nation, is put into grave danger. For a long time, I couldn't bring myself to critically think about what was happening in Bangladesh, because I was scared about what I would find. But one day, it finally registered for me that it's 2019, and if what everyone says is true, I will see my people drown in my lifetime. Things felt like an existential mess, and I realized the only thing I could do was open my eyes and look into this narrative of a drowning Bangladesh. But what I uncovered was a story that I'd never heard before. It's a story that brought me joy, hope, and a renewed understanding of how humanity can redefine its relationship with the environment. I decided that I want to uphold this vision of Bangladesh, not the one that is suspended in the dust of never-ending development, or an image of 1,000 brown, empty hands outstretched to passerby. Not the one that is drowning.
Sunduma, a forest of mangrove trees teeming with life, home of the Bengal tiger and Ganges River dolphin. Since the dawn of time, Bengal had been the site of a multi-millennial-long love story between land and sea. It was a volatile, dynamic sort of love. Sometimes the sea swallowed the soil, and sometimes the soil subsumed the sea. Despite its transient nature, humans were inexplicably attracted to this place, and many created homes on this land because it had the most fertile soil they had ever sowed their seeds in. The people who first settled on this land were called the Char dwellers. They had an unspoken understanding that by choosing to live there and subsist off the richest soil on the planet, they must not intervene in the relationship between land and sea. Many times, this meant that their farmland was flooded every few years, and that it was a sign that they must migrate elsewhere, return their borrowed land to the sea. After generations of living in harmony and caring for the land, the Char dwellers began to notice something different. The river from the Himalayas nurturing their land was bursting with water, more water than they had ever seen. Monsoons arrived unannounced and out of step with the cycles of seasons. Waves in the sea swelled higher than before, and seawater started seeping into their farmland, leaving salt crystals when it left. One day, a man from the city came to the Char dwellers.
How are you people living like this? As cowards, running from the land that you own. You must dig canals and build walls to protect your farmland.
Within the blink of an eye, city dwellers arrived upon the coast with a large machine and official papers and loud voice. The walls were built. Everything seemed calm. Once again, the Char dwellers had bountiful crops, and they found that they could live longer on their land. But quietly, the land started to sink from depression and lose its vibrancy. The soil and the sea tried many paths to return to one another, but no matter what they tried, they could not find their way back to synergy. The seas swelled with anger and began to crash over the walls. That same night, the moon rose from the horizon. The sea sharply receded as if being sucked into a vacuum, and strange sounds from the water filled the air. And a dark figure emerged from the water. A woman in blood-red cloth and eyes as dark as the depths of the sea walked to the wall, bells accompanying each footstep. She stared at the Char dwellers before her, who were sleeping in their half-submerged homes. She whispered, "Virasho, Virasho, Virasho." Cyclical return. She turned back and vanished into the sea. Next morning, the Char woman awoke, with blood running down their thighs, stones in their stomachs, tears marking their cheeks, and began to walk in circles, whispering to themselves. Virajo, virajo, virajo. With their fingernails, they clawed at the wall. The men of the CHR joined them one by one until they all stood there in a daze, standing in a pool of crimson water. The wall had ceased to exist. Taken down. At first, the sea eagerly rushed in to meet the land. The men of the CHR had fled from the coast, migrating to the government's secondary refuge cities that were built deep inland. But we stayed. We built homes on stilts, homes floating above the water, homes inside our physical bodies. We waited, knowing of cyclical return. Restoration, growth, virajo, virajo, virajo. The land arose from the sea, heightened. It grew and grew and grew until it stood tall, looking over the sea. Fertile, virajo.